So much, Greg. I appreciate your help there. Hello. Hello. Wow. Welcome all of you to our candidate for the Associate University Librarian for Scholarly Communication and Collections. And I want to introduce to you, if you haven't already met, Curtis Brundy, who comes to us from Wartburg College, where he runs that show. I also want to give you a little bit more information that you already have, which is he's a doctoral candidate for educational leadership and higher education at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He has a degree from the University of North Texas, and also University of Nevada. So clearly in the warmer climates, we're not here now, are we? His topic today he'll be talking about is scholarly communication in academic libraries today, challenges, and there it is again, challenges and opportunities for collections and technical services. And without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ed. Well, thanks everybody. I'm very happy to be here today, and I will be covering all of the topic. It just didn't all fit on this slide. So as all of you know, this is an exciting and transformative time to be working in academic libraries, and I don't think any part of our operation is getting touched more than the areas of collections. And this is extremely important because I think for a lot of our users, when they think about the library, what they think about oftentimes is the collection and vice versa. So rightly or wrongly, that's the perspective that they have. And I would imagine that most of us in this room, when we think of the collection, we probably have a more broader conception of what that might be. But even though the way that we look at the collection might be a little bit different, I think that we would all agree on the primary importance of it. And this is reflected in your strategic plan. Goal 2 of your strategic plan mentions building what, I'm going to hit your adjectives here. They were preserving and making a dynamic collection available. That speaks to the importance of the collection going forward. Before talking more specifically about scholarly communication, I want to talk a little bit more about the collection because I think the collection provides a backdrop against which much of the action in scholarly communications is happening. So I think it used to be that the library collection was a fairly uncontested concept. I think it was contained. I think 25 years ago, if we would have spoke with our users, I think that we probably would have been in agreement that most of what is contained in the collection is what was contained in the building. Obviously, the internet has completely changed all of that. The collection obviously is no longer contained by the walls of the building, and I would argue that it's not contained by the walls of the library budget anymore, especially not to our users who, if our users think of a library collection at all, if that's a conception in their heads, it is just one small part of a very large information system that they interact with on a daily basis. So in a lot of ways, when we talk about the collection, that's kind of internal communication, and I don't think it really translates to our users. So what we are seeing today in research library collections is an ongoing and drastic shift from the local collection to one that is more scaled at the level of the collective or the network, which is how Morgan Dempsey likes to talk about it. What I'd like to do before I get into scholarly communication, I want to run into some of the components that I think are what makes up the research library collection. So obviously it's everything that we buy and license from our good friends up here. It's, and I'm being a little sarcastic there, you can probably tell. I got to go on, and I'm breaking from my script here, but when I was at Creighton University, we subscribed to some collection from Springer. And when I went to ALA, I was with the director, and he said, "Hey, Curtis, do you want to go have dinner with these publishers because we're buying this collection?" We were in New Orleans, and we went to this fancy gumbo place with the publisher guys. And I swore right then and there I would never break bread with those people again. I think that mixing with those folks, considering the types of relationships that we have to have with them, the mixing of that kind of influence peddling, they're not our friends. But anyway, the collection also is made up of our fledgling publishing efforts, and I just threw this group up here. I think they're doing exciting work right now. The collection is our stake in our shared print repositories and our digital preservation efforts. And I don't have a separate slide for this, but I would also say the collection is the agreements are agreements with our neighbors on what part of their collection is involved in collective acquisition and retention agreements with us. That's definitely part of the collection. This stuff, which I think we're still sorting out what to do with this, especially in any sort of consortial setting, but the DDA books, those thousands and thousands of records that are so easy now to fill in our catalog, waiting for those to be triggered or not. Resource sharing, you know, it's a different way to think about the collection, but our little connections that go out throughout the library world, again, when we think of the collection, it might be a little more siloed, but for the user, if they can get that book from across the country, it might as well be part of that overall conception of the collection. Here's a big one. I would say that the collection includes every piece of open access content out there, and we need to push to make sure that that part of the collection is growing. This looks familiar to you, our digital repositories. That's a huge part of the collection. And I would say that everything in the public domain is part of the collection. And finally, in getting at what makes our collection, because a lot of this stuff is things, we've got the commodity part of the collection that everybody owns, which doesn't distinguish us. We've got open access, which everybody has access to. That doesn't distinguish us. Public domain doesn't distinguish us. What distinguishes us is our special collections. And this is a huge part of the collection, especially going forward. And it's a place where we're going to see more library resources being allocated. So that's a vision of the collection that is, I would say it's unbounded. It's a definition that is scaled to maximize access and to reap the efficiencies of libraries plural working together rather than libraries singular. It's a vision of the collection that's built every bit on relationships, partnerships, and collaborations than it is on what any individual library or any individual library budget might accomplish. And I think it also includes our stewardship obligations, and it relies heavily on our history and our success. If libraries do one thing well, I think we work well together, and we have quite a history and quite an infrastructure for doing that, and we'll be doing more of that in the future. So, getting on into scholarly communication. So, I think the most common way to conceive of scholarly communication at the individual library level is in the context of tools and services. And the Park Library is doing these things just, you know, to one extent or another, just as every other research library in the land is. I'm going to talk just a little bit in more detail on a couple of these that I think are important to tie back into the collection. And I don't want to take another pot shot at the publishers. I already had my pot shot at them. But after I put my drippy faucet up here, I was like, well, they're not going to have any idea why you have that silly picture of a dripping faucet. But the faucet, to me, you know, in full flow, is the amount of information that we want running through our society for the creation of knowledge. And this is what I think we get. And the hand on that faucet lever, you can imagine, is it's not the library that's controlling that flow, it's other forces. So I'm going to talk just a little bit more about the institutional repository. Now, I would put the institutional repository under what Lorcan Dempsey has talked about, our inside-out emphasis of our collection. We're no longer about what is out there, bringing it in. We're also about what's in here that we're getting out. And I think that's hugely important. And the repository is a big part of those efforts. I feel that way especially about our repositories because of the potential of the repository as a publishing platform. I don't think it's going to be our only publishing platform going forward, but it's a big one that we have up and going and that we have invested heavily. And I put this group up here because I think you guys are part of this, the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, but there's thousands of these around the world. And so this network just recognizes a tremendous amount of potential for publishing going forward. So I was excited to read about what you guys are doing with the ISU Digital Press. I think that's an initiative that's well worth supporting. I don't think library publishing is a fad. I don't think it's one of those things as librarians as we're trying to figure out what we're going to be, you know, in the midst of our anxiety about maintaining relevance that we're grabbing onto. I think this is going to have staying power. So to talk just a little bit more about library publishing, is Ed mentioned I'm working on my PhD at the University of Nebraska. So spent a lot of time at that library, and I've kind of been following Paul Royster there. And I like his approach with library publishing. I think between, anybody can publish a book these days, so anyone can self-publish, but there's a reason why scholars would be pretty reluctant to do that. And then you have the university presses over at this side, and in between those two extremes, there's this big gap, and I think libraries are in a great position to throw a rope down to the authors and bring some of that work to surface, that otherwise would not see the light of day. Second reason I'm real excited about library publishing is that, and I don't want to say this in a negative way, but I think there's been a lot of gnashing of teeth, like in the library community, about scholarly publishing. And mostly the root of this is our lack of leverage with the publishers. And so you guys are going through your negotiations with, I think for your big deal with Elsevier. Lori just mentioned something about you're hitting head on with Springer. We have no leverage in those conversations. And so you can feel kind of like you do want to just gnash your teeth and you're feeling helpless. Well, library publishing is something where we're proactive, where we're going to take the bull by the horns and not complain, and we're going to start trying to change the world right now with the tools that we have. And to me, I have a background, before as a librarian, I worked as a union organizer, and one of my heroes was Joe Hill. And Joe Hill was an organizer. He was a great songwriter. He was a wobbly, he was a radical, and then they killed him in Utah for his activities. But when he was sitting in the jail, he sent a famous letter to Big Bill Haywood, and he said, "Don't mourn, organize." And to me, library publishing is part of us organizing ourselves and taking the future in our own hands rather than just waiting to see what these publishers are going to do that might benefit us. Because I think we'll be waiting a long time for that. So now I already just kind of started touching on this, but now I want to zoom out and talk about scholarly communication as a movement. And I want to do this because, I think our tools and service and the publishing, our fledgling publishing efforts, they do have the potential to impact the collection, but not in the way that the big picture things are going to impact our collections. And I think in the last 12 months, we have just seen some pretty dramatic things happening that finally might be bringing us to a crossroads with scholarly communications. So one of the things that came up last year is Sci-Hub, and Sci-Hub is kind of the Napster of the scholarly publishing world. So this graduate student in Kazakhstan figured out how to automate the process of basically stealing all of the articles out of our databases using either gifted or borrowed credentials. And according to most folks, what's in Sci-Hub right now is the totality of those major publisher collections. So anybody can, if you don't have direct access to content, maybe you're not privileged to be at a research university, maybe you're a doctor working in a third world country where you don't have access to the clinical literature, well, all of a sudden, kaboom, here it is. Anybody has access to this. And who's using it? Science they had access to the server logs of Sci-Hub back in the spring. They did an analysis. And where Sci-Hub, the downloads are happening for this pirate site, it's where research activity is happening. It's happening in the United States. And you would say, well, why is that? Why would a research hub like Ames, Iowa, where students have access to all this, you guys are spending over $10 million a year, it looks like, on this licensed electronic content. Why would they go here? Well, they go here because it works so easy. I searched for the articles that I've published, and you just put the title in there, and boom, you've got the PDF. You don't have to be on campus. You don't have to worry about IP ranges. You don't have to worry about any of that. You can just pull it down. And I'm not mentioning this because I'm advocating for privacy. I'm mentioning this because the scholarly landscape has shifted, and this is part of the shift that has happened. Once in a, way back when, and the publishers would think of this fondly, all of their articles were safely tucked behind the paywall. Well, the paywall has a big hole blown through it, and Sci-Hub is the one that did that. And that has implications for what's going to be coming in scholarly publications, I believe. The next event I'm going to mention in scholarly publishing is what's going on with the academic social networks. 5 years we weren't even talking about these. Now all of a sudden our researchers are signing up for these sites. Not only are they signing up and using them to communicate with one another, but they're uploading their articles onto here. As a community, these social networks have a total disregard for copyright, and for whatever reason, the publishers have not cracked down on them. I mean, for one reason, I think they might just be looking at buying them all out, like they did with Elsevier did with Mendeley. But they've turned the cheek for now. People are loading all this content up there, and as a consequence, maybe it's impacting what's going into our repositories, maybe it's not. What we do know is that our repositories are getting hit with more strict and longer embargo periods, so it's harder for us to put the content into our repositories. So I think these social networks are just getting started, and we will probably see what happens in this area, similar to what happened in the Facebook and LinkedIn area. There'll probably be one of these that comes to dominate, and researchers will flock to it, and they will use it, and it's going to have an impact on the scholarly landscape going forward. And the next one I'm going to talk about, there's several things pushing us toward, in the scholarly communication community, they've been talking about the pros and cons of green open access to gold open access for at least 15 years, maybe longer. If you're not familiar with this language, gold open access is based on, instead of the publisher making their money off us paying subscriptions after publications, the publisher makes their money when the author publishes. The author pays the publisher X number of dollars up front in an APC. That's what gold open access is. And in the last, I would say not even 12 months, there's been a lot of things that have come up that's kind of pushing us in a gold direction. I'm not saying I think that's going to happen, but I think, again, these are things that are shifting the scholarly landscape in the last 12 months. So one of these is the Open Access 2020 initiative. This came out from the Max Planck Institute. They did a high-level analysis. And according to their assumptions, and these are assumptions based on what is an average APC? Is it $1,500? Is it $2,000? Is it $3,000? And how much money is in the research library budgets? And based on their analysis, they think that there's enough money that could be reallocated from the research library budgets to flip over to a gold open access model. And they think we could do this by 2020. So by 2020, everything is published open access. Libraries have shifted a huge amount of their budgets toward this pool of APC money. So rather than paying subscriptions, our monies would go to paying APCs. Another 2020 deadline has came up. This one is from May, when the European Union said that by 2020, all scientific articles need to be open access. Where are the teeth in that? What are they going to do? What initiatives are they going to get moving to make that happen? I don't know. But again, this is another one pushing toward this crossroads where we might be seeing a bigger shift toward open access in the future. The next one, let's talk about the publishers. What are they doing? Are they going to sit around and just depend on their 30% profits on getting library subscriptions forever? Not by the looks of it. They're acquiring all sorts of companies to position themselves going forward. They're rolling out OA access mega journals. Here's 2 examples of it. And they're flipping a lot of their journals, not flipping them, but they're turning journals into hybrids. So you can either, we got to watch them for double dipping on this, but they're experimenting. That's what it boils down to. The publishers are experimenting because they see that the ground is shifting as well. Something else they're doing, and I think they're doing this in Europe, I was reading about, is that the big deals used to be just about what we're subscribing to. Well, now they're making agreements on the big deal that roll in these APC, these hybrid APC charges as well. So the publishers are not sitting idly by. Their hands are on the levers, and they're doing what they can, you can be sure, to maintain their profits and their standing in their control of the industry. Let me catch up with my script here. So closing thoughts. I want to talk just a little bit about, the prompt was about scholarly communications, challenges, and opportunities for technical services and collection. When I was thinking about this, there's lots of little things. We're seeing position changes, job descriptions are changing because we're not doing as much cataloging, we're doing more metadata, but this bigger picture potential of open access coming along would have dramatic impacts on collections and technical services. If there was a major shift to open access, we can imagine the emergence of probably a dominant discovery platform. I put my money behind Google Scholar, who can compete with them. If all of the content going forward is open access, they're well positioned to be the best place to provide that access, unless one of these academic social network sites. You know, maybe the ResearchGate or the academia, maybe one of those will come to dominate that field as if the way that Facebook does, and if all the researchers are there, that's where a lot of the discovery will happen. Does that mean that we're going to be moving out of the discovery and content business? I don't think so, because if you think about this puzzle, this is only one part of it. Journals going forward, open access, that still leaves behind the retrospective legacy collection of copyrighted material. So we're not going to be turning our proxy servers off anytime soon. We're still going to need to license that content and provide access to it. So in closing, I would just say I think that you know, we can talk about the tools and services aspect of scholarly communication, and they're probably not going to have real dramatic impacts on what's happening in technical services collective. But if you look at scholarly communication as a movement, which a lot of people are looking at it, then the potential is dramatic. Imagine having, you know, $5, $8, $9 million of the library budget moved out of subscriptions and moved toward paying APCs. That'd be a dramatic shift. It would affect technology, workflows, budgets, job descriptions, all the way down the line. And I'm going to stop there.
Well, thank you, Curtis. All right, you may start with your questions. Who's first? Oh, shy. I like that.
What drew you to this position to apply for it?
That's a great question, because I am coming from a liberal arts college, and you know the emphasis at my college is on teaching. It's not on research. We don't have a research collection. In the way that I was talking about the collection, you know, we deal with such a small part of that. It's not a big part of my day-to-day. And I actually left a couple sentences here that were on my script, and what it was is that I think that what we're dealing with scholarly communications and with the transformation of the collection, I feel like that's some of the biggest things that we're dealing with in academic libraries. I think that this is how we solve the open access piece and the spillover onto collections. I feel like in 50 years, 30 years, when folks look back at what we accomplished during our careers, the legacy we're leaving, this is a big part of our legacy we're leaving to the profession, leaving to society. And I feel like I'm sidelined to some extent being at a small college library where I don't deal with these issues. I'm passionate about these issues, and so this excites me to have an opportunity to work with this in my day-to-day job. It would excite me. Yeah. Yes?
I don't know how this kind of goes into your thoughts on the future, but what about institutional cooperation with other institutions? Both what we're doing now and what we might need to be doing in terms of a future where it would seem like all institutions would have to have an agreement that we would not pay money for resources and instead do our budgeting differently.
And I have to say, like, since I've become an academic librarian, I think some of the most satisfying work that I have done has been with collaborations with other libraries. I really, really enjoy and take a lot of value out of that work. For example, I'm working with with Greg and Don on the Two River Alma collaboration. That's a new statewide collaboration. I've done a lot of work with the Alliance Group, working on the task force that's putting together a joint RFP. We're pulling the public libraries together, the academic libraries together with the state library to expand. Most of us know the state library puts out that sort of limited EBSCO database package where we're going to roll a bunch of academic content into that and put an RFP out in March for that. Before I got in my car and started driving, I spent an hour and a half, you know, working on the group that's putting that RFP together. And, so I mentioned all of that to say that I have experience working with these sorts of things. I think that is the future. I was asking Ed when he was talking about giving me my tour, he was mentioning the weeding project that you guys are doing, and I was asking about what kind of, you know, cooperative retention agreements do you have? You know, what institutions are you working together with to make sure that the last copy of this doesn't accidentally disappear from the shelf. And it doesn't make sense to me the way that the academic libraries are splitting out and doing this work. It's kind of based on, long-standing alliances. So the University of Iowa is going to work with those libraries that they work with. You've got the people who are left out of those agreements forging their own alliances. So there's the Central Iowa Initiative, which is UNI, Grinnell, Drake. They're pulling together to analyze their collection and talk about how they can work together and cooperative acquisitions and making sure that they have these retention agreements. You guys are doing this with, I forget the name of the group, but is it the Greater Western Library Alliance where you're doing the journal agreements? So to me, that's the future of the collection. We really need to work together on these things, and that's also part of what drew me to this position. I would like to do more of that work. I really enjoy it, and I think it's really important.
Anybody else? Yes, Kim.
Okay, hi, I'm Ken, but you'll meet me later today. I'm the digital initiative archivist. So I wondered if you could tell us about your dissertation research.
About my dissertation? I was just telling Beth at breakfast about that. I'm finishing my last coursework right now, and what I have lots of ideas and lots of areas of interest, and my advisor is completely frustrated with me because I keep bouncing around. But what I mentioned to Beth is I do think that I am coming on a position change in the next 12 months, and that's aligning exactly with when I should be getting down to work with this dissertation. And so in some ways I'm waiting to see where I land, and what if, I could easily imagine that if I were to get the position here, it would have a scholarly communication or collection focus. If I end up at another private college, it might very well, and I'm a director, it might very well take a leadership direction. I'm working on a publication right now on a leadership topic, and I like leadership to some extent. I don't know if I could write about it for 18 months, but so it's up in the air. Thank you for asking.
I'm curious how you feel about non-text collections that publishers are starting and libraries are starting as well. You focused a lot on traditional publications, but there's other things publishers are starting as well.
And what are some examples of that? This is beyond ebooks.
Yeah, there's a lot of data collections that are starting to be tied directly to publishers. And
Yeah.
a lot of them are supposed to be making that open access, and then people find out they're not.
I think that all of that is just getting sorted out right now, and I would say that there's probably at this point, I would say that there's more of an advocacy implication for us, rather than like budgetary implications. And to be honest, this is one of those areas where, being a director at a liberal arts college, like that's off my radar, and so that'd be an area where I would need to learn more. But I would pull back to the advocacy part of that. I just don't think we could sit back in our libraries anymore and not that we ever did. I mean, we've always done advocacy. But I think it could also be argued that we could always have done more advocacy on things like this. And they don't need to be securing more of our information behind their paywalls. Yes?
What is your leadership and collaboration style?
I would say collaboration style. When I talk to my wife, like when I come home, and like all of our others do when you come home, how was your day? And like when I can honestly say, it was just a great day, it was a good day at the library, and then I tell her what I did. What I did that made it great is when I'm out working with people, and I really enjoy working with people and collaboration and interacting and doing joint projects. So I guess I bring kind of a sincere interest in that, and I see the value in solving problems collaboratively. It's very funny, not funny, I think there can be a conflict in exercising leadership from this type of position, because on one hand, you're in a formal position, So you're part of a hierarchy where you have direct reporting lines, and that dictates some nature of that relationship. But then on the other hand, you want to collaborate, you want to work with people in a way that doesn't get in the way. You know, you don't want people thinking about you as a boss all the time, and I don't want to be thought of that way. I'm gonna grab my shovel and start digging side by side with people. So I guess that's part of, I don't know, it's hard to answer that. You know, I'm reading about leadership, and the more I read about leadership, the more I think that nobody has any idea what that even means. And so it's kind of hard to answer.
Good answer.
Yes.
Hi, if you were to get the position, how would you see your role and the areas that you oversee supporting library efforts to advance diversity?
I would think this is a leadership position in the library, so it would have a very important role with diversity. And I think these issues have exploded in the last couple of years on campuses, and people are paying more attention to them. One of the last classes I'm taking in my program is a course on diversity and inclusion, and I would want to be hands-on involved with that. I read the diversity report. I think that you wrote it. Because I was looking at people's pictures, I think I recognize you, and I missing the names. But it sounds to me like you guys are touching a lot of the right things with diversity, and I think we can always do more. And I just think, good God, after what's happened in November, I just had to have a meeting with my staff to talk about keeping an eye out in the building for discriminatory things, whatever that might be. I don't know how many of you saw the article from Library Journal, I think it was from this week, talking about all these different libraries that are seeing racist things written on whiteboards, sticky notes left in bathrooms, and that's an obvious one where we need to engage with our community and make sure that that stuff is being talked about, and that we don't accept it. So I don't know exactly where I would plug in here, but I would tell you that this is hugely important to me, and I've just been traumatized, like a lot of people, over what's been happening in our country, and I would want to have a safe, diverse place. That's where I want to work.
Any other questions, Curtis, this morning? This is your chance. Yes, go
I have
ahead.
another question. How would you characterize your negotiation stance with publishers?
You know, we don't subscribe to a big deal, you know, so we're mostly dealing with aggregators, so most of my debating negotiating has been with more like the EBSCOs and the ProQuest of the world. But I'm an aggressive negotiator, and I don't take, my experience is that you can push, and then push some more on pricing. And I mean, I don't want to, I'm not completely confrontational about it, but I actually think you need to bring that level. I'm not inherently like a confrontational person, but negotiating with publishers brings that out. And I will hold the line and negotiate hard, and I will seek out leverage where we can find it, through partnerships or whatever that might be. So I actually enjoy that aspect. I like wrangling the publishers and negotiating.
Anything else? Well, very good then. Thank Curtis. Qualtrics review. Qualtrics. And we're adjourned.